This is Expert Course, Counter Argument.
Imagine that you're on trial for murder. And when you're on trial, the defense attorney, the guy who was hired to get you off from the crime, brings in a knife. Happens to be the very knife that killed the victim. Well, if he just said, "I'm done, here's the knife," what would happen? You're going to jail. Well, there is a very important reason why a defense attorney would bring in the weapon like that. Let's say your house had been broken into. It's been proven. We know this. There's a police report on file. Okay, no big deal. But what if the defense attorney also pointed out that there were fingerprints on the knife that were not yours? In fact, those fingerprints, they happen to belong to your long-sworn enemy, who publicly told everybody that he was going to get even at you for stealing his girlfriend. Well, suddenly, that knife doesn't seem so important anymore, does it? If anything, it only strengthens your case. That's because your defense attorney's job is to know what the strong arguments of the prosecution is going to be so that they can knock those points down. That's exactly what we want to do in an essay. We want to bring up what the opponent's arguments are going to be so that we can then knock those down. In your argument essay, you're going to want to bring up a counter argument. But if you just put the counter argument out there, it actually weakens your argument. You actually need to then also include a rebuttal. So what I'm going to be talking about is how do you formulate a counter argument and a rebuttal. So let's say that you've been given an essay assignment to argue whether or not Odysseus was a good leader from the Odyssey. And you want to say that yes, Odysseus is a good leader. So you need to address that there are people out there that might disagree with you. So you say Odysseus is a good leader. Some others may say, no, he's not a good leader. And one piece of evidence they might present is that nobody survived except for Odysseus. None of his men came back with him. So we need to acknowledge that that is a valid argument. So we might say something like, some may argue that he failed as a leader because none of his men survived the voyage home. But then I need to refute that. I need to explain why that on the face may seem like a good argument, but in fact it may be flawed. So here's what I might say. I might say, this doesn't prove that he was a bad leader, because if it weren't for his leadership, the men would have all died much sooner. But I still need to support that. So that is my rebuttal. One piece of support I would give is that the Trojan War had gone already for 10 years by the time Odysseus came up with the Trojan horse idea. There was no signs that the war was going to end anytime soon. Greeks and Trojans were dying in large numbers. Very likely his men would have died then. So I would say if it weren't for Odysseus's cleverness, he and his men would likely have died in Troy. That's my claim, that if Odysseus had not come up with the idea of the Trojan horse, the men would have died sooner. But I still need to create some commentary. I need to explain that evidence, how that relates back to my original premise. And I would simply say the war had been at a stalemate for 10 years, with Greeks dying every day. Odysseus came up with a plan of sneaking into the walled city by hiding inside a false peace offering. This ended the war and gave Odysseus and his men a chance to return home. Okay, I'm still not done. I need to give more support to back up my claim. Now, to wrap this up, just like any paragraph, I need a conclusion, a sentence to wrap up and move into my next paragraph. And I would simply say something like, Odysseus kept his wits about him and escaped the cave, giving his men much longer lives than they would have otherwise had. So it's very important to remember in a counter-argument paragraph, just like any paragraph, transitions are very important. So to help you with this, I'm just going to offer a few possible sentence starters for your counter-argument. You might say, some people might say, or some people might argue. Another one would be, contrary to my belief. Another one would be, Well, on the other hand, and finally, you could start with, however, not everyone agrees, and then you would give the counter argument. Some different sentence starters for the rebuttal portion of your paragraph would be, although this is a valid argument, or this may be true, but, or simply the word however, and then go ahead and launch into your rebuttal. It's incredibly important to include a counter argument and rebuttal in your persuasive essay because you need to anticipate what the opposition would say. It strengthens your case. That way you can preemptively, which just means ahead of time, you can preemptively cut off any attacks before they might happen.